Nautel transmitters, all different models. Each one of those transmitters would have its own MIB file that would be loaded into your manager. Okay, and that way you can go and poll each one based on the things that they are capable of monitoring. And we're going to get into the breakdown of the MIBs quite a bit, because once you understand how those MIBs are put together, the rest sort of falls into place. And at that point, it tends to make a lot more sense. At least it did to me. And remember, I left customer service and moved to sales about 18 years ago because I said I'd spent too much time setting IP addresses and not enough time troubleshooting power amplifiers. And I was trying to get away from that computer stuff. And look at me now. Not sure how well that worked. So the managers go and ask the agents, hey, what's the status of this, that, or the other thing? The agents send that data to them, and that's how you get your meter readings. Or the manager will send a set command, say set this high or low to turn, say, a transmitter on or off, or an air conditioner or a generator or whatever you've got that's SNMP controllable. Okay, the agents usually, not always, but usually are resident on the equipment. Like in our case, the SNMP agent resides on every transmitter. Okay, and then a browser is just a good way to look, but not so much, like it'll let you look at everything without actually organizing it. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. So what is the structure? Well, the structure is a whole lot of numbers. I mean, it's a whole lot of numbers. So if you look, for example, on the right-hand side in this MIB browser here, this is iReasoning. It's a free MIB browser. You can download it for personal use, or you can get low-price trials. But you can load a MIB file in, and it will tell you everything in that file. And the MIB file is as good or as bad as the company that wrote it, the programmer that wrote it. So like ours, for example, you can see that the OID, the object identifier for this particular one that we're looking at for the reset, you can see a big long string of numbers there. And all that is a whole lot of things to say that this is the reset line for a Nautel VS300 transmitter controller. And that is where SNMP has such an amazing amount of power, because in this object identifier, the OID, you have everything right down to the manufacturer, the circuit board, the active status, what it should be, what it is. It's all right there. I mean, we'll break down an OID a little bit in a couple of slides too. And what I'm going to do, rather than do organized question time, if I hit something and I'm not real clear on it, just unmute yourself and interrupt me and say, hey, dummy, I don't get what you're saying, because sometimes that's the only way to get my attention. All right, so carrying on, looking at the management information base a little closer, the OIDs, the object identifiers, these are your commands. These are the things being monitored or the things being told what to do. And if you look at the OID, and again, we'll break it down a little later, but the first 4 digits are going to be the same for just about everything that we do, because it's internet-based, DID, or Department of Defense, and enterprise system. And then you've got the 4 is private organization. The one after that, I forget what that one is. And the 28142 in this case is Nautel. So every company that has SNMP will have a registry number. You can look up exactly what, from an OID, you can look up what company that is. You can sometimes break down and see what product. For us, FM is, or the number 1 after the 28142, that's broadcast transmitters, because we make both broadcast, navigational, and some other things that I can't talk about. 300 is a VS300, 256 is the controller, and in this case, 7 is the reset function. So just from that string of numbers, I can tell you exactly what function on what piece of equipment from what manufacturer I'm looking at. That's the real power of this. Now, again, the challenge becomes that all of these are collated into the MIB file, the Management Information Base, which is just a text file. And depending on how that's written, there is a structure for them. There is a protocol, so they're usually pretty close, but not always. And it's the little things like, in this case, the description, which is kind of what tells you what it does. So, you know, that's the sort of thing that you need to use. If you're using an MIB browser to look through these things, the description will tell you what the or how to activate it if it's a command, or what the default value should be. And, you know, it's just all right there. So it's incredibly structured. It's really powerful. And like I said, it can be as easy or as difficult to set up as you want to make it. So there's the basic breakdown. Now, I didn't, at the time I wrote this, I don't think I even knew that the 1 was for our broadcast division. So I learned that after the fact. 2 is nav aids, 3 is sonar, 4 is the secret sauce. And I say for us, 2, 5, 6 is controller. We've also got command structures for exciters and power supplies and various other things. So the having the MIB file, and I think I've got a screenshot of one of those coming up a little later, will allow you to break down exactly what you're dealing with. And as I said, for everything we do, the 1.3.6.1 will always be the same. Typically for us, the 4.1 after that will be the same, and then you get into the things that are unique per manufacturer. Like Nautel's code is 28142. I'm sure Gates Air and obviously Elnos. Anybody that does SNMP will have a code. And so it's kind of cool because then you can break down and figure out exactly what you're looking for. So what are the commands? Well, the commands are pretty basic. There's 7 of them, and there's some variations of them. Like the get command means, hey, go look at this object identifier and tell me what the value of it is. So fairly simple, fairly straightforward. Now there's a get next, which is just basically go to this one, get next, go to the next command. So if you're looking at command 7, which was our reset, then it would look at 8 or whatever the next sequential number was. Okay. Get response is basically the same thing for a different version. And that's, in our setup, we use get, set, and trap more than anything else. Trap is alarm functions. So if you have trap set and something goes out of tolerance or out of its normal parameters, and on the on your manager, you can configure where those tolerances are over and above what the manufacturer set. But anyway, so if you have a trap set and it's constantly pulling value, and it will let you know if there's an alarm as well. Walk basically just starts at the beginning and step by step by step by step all the way through the entire MIB file. So it is something that if you've got a browser that's looking at everything, it will constantly pull. Like most of these browsers are designed to monitor networks, computer networks. So a lot of times when you turn it on, it will scan your network. It'll grab everything it sees, and then it'll just start looking for traffic and alarms all the way. And it can bog things down a little. So unless you really have a situation where you need to use it, you're better off just to pick the specific things you want to monitor and look at those. And the less bandwidth we use, the more we have for other stuff, like letting the sales guys surf the web for their next car or whatever. All right. So how do we do this? Well, on the transmitter side or on the equipment side, you will have to do some basic configuration. Okay, there will be port assignments. Typically, the agents use port 161 for SNMP, and traps are on port 162. Your read and write communities will need passwords assigned, and if they don't need passwords assigned, then you need to put some serious firewalling in front of that device, whatever it may be. And I'll show you one in a little bit where the firewalling is good enough that I couldn't even get into it, and it's one of my transmitters. So that's maybe more a reflection on me than anything else. But once you've set your passwords and decide whether you're enabling traps or not, again, you may not use this for firing alarms in all applications, or you may decide that you do want to use it to fire alarms, but only on some managers. So again, the configuration is totally up to your own imagination or your own application, what you want to do with it. And that's probably, I think, the thing that got me the most excited about SNMP when I first learned about it is just the power. So for us, if you do want to do traps and alarms, now there are on a VS300, which is what this screen is, and that's our smallest, simplest transmitter, there are something like 100 parameters that can send you an alarm. And if you put them all in there, which you certainly could, your odds of making it through the night without being woken up at least once go to about 0. So use a little bit of discretion, you know. I mean, I picked for mine RF off, interlock open, because we have a magnetic switch on our site door. And it's there primarily for safety reasons, but it's also, that's my alarm right there, because if somebody opens my transmitter site door, station goes off the air and about 5 different cell phones start to ring. You know, it also trips the cameras on the site too, but that's a whole different thing. So, you know, just whatever you want to configure it for. We have ours set for IPA output, and if all power amplifiers inactive, which typically means a power supply failure. So, you know, pick and choose depending on your product. It's going to vary from one to another, whether you're looking at RF, audio, video, whatever. But just realize that there will be some configuration. In a lot of cases, there will be a lot of configuration. Now, as far as managers go for SNMP, there are dozens of them, and I've got some of them listed on a slide going down. This one is PRTG. It's made by a company called Passler. It's really heavy on network configuration. The good thing about it is it's fairly automated, so it's relatively basic to set up. The bad thing is, because it's relatively basic to set up, you don't get to pick and choose what you see. The other thing is that some of them, as I said, will require passwords, and you're going to have to know your IP address. So a lot of this stuff does require static IPs. And I mean, if you're used to dealing with transmitters and remote control, you're used to using static IPs anyway, but just be aware that that is potentially a situation. So the first thing we do, once we get our manager downloaded, whichever one we happen to choose, we've got to configure it. And the first thing to do with that is to load the MIBs. Now, on a lot of the ones I've used, this is iReasoning, and iReasoning, you import the MIB. ScriptEasy, Passler, most of them you import the MIBs. One of the ones I was playing with today, and I'll have to look at that in a little bit, you don't import the MIB, you load every object identifier that you want to monitor specifically. And again, because it's configured for computers, that's a lot more automated than broadcast equipment. Now, to their credit, probably one of the best companies for working with SNMP these days is, well, there's a bunch of them, but if you just want an automated system, Automats Relio is pretty basic, and they'll load MIBs. I think that Davicom remotes, a lot of them can work with SNMP, and I know they've got all our MIB files as well. So definitely, you know, if you're looking at an SNMP remote, that's one of the things you want to know is they have the MIB files for my specific Burke, and also with the autopilot, or what do they call their autopilot now? That system, plus Connect, that can be configured with the MIBs from a bunch of manufacturers. All right, for us, the MIB files, that may be an old link. If you go to our website and software, then you'll see the FTP link on there. You can just go to the parent directory until you get to the SNMP MIBs. But definitely, any manufacturer you deal with, you're going to have the ability to get to, or you should have the ability to get the MIB files. For us, we've got them on the website on the FTP, everything we build that uses SNMP. Some of them, and again, PS300, some of them, there are 3 different variations of SNMP or MIB file, depending specifically on the software you've got in your transmitter. Of course, my service guy says, well, you're going to update your transmitter, but realistically, that doesn't always happen. So we do provide the MIB files for the different versions. So here are some of the ones that I found on if you do a quick web free SNMP managers, you will be inundated. One on the screen here is Laureate. Laureate is a great one for looking at networks. I played with it for long enough to discover that I didn't have the interest in learning how to use it to the point of configuring it for broadcast, but somebody who's more into that could probably do it. iReasoning browser, but it is very much it looks at everything. PRTG, that's quite customizable. That one I do use a lot. Zabbix, if you're a Linux person, that is the one to go to. Because Zabbix is just amazing for what you can do with it. It can be run in a Windows world. I have not at all. So, you know, I've got a copy of that running on a machine and played with it quite a bit. Basically, you pick whatever one works best for what you want to accomplish. And I've had people, I had one customer in Washington State wrote SNMP Manager. So it's, like I say, it's as simple or as complex as you want it to be. The big thing, and here's an example with Passler, PRTGs, where I created a couple of custom inputs. And you build your own sensors. So you put the OID, the object identifier, into the sensor, and then you tell it from there exactly what you're looking for. Now, in this case, it's not finding anything because it's one of our marketing guys' transmitter, and I don't know whether he's got the port 161 blocked or whether his firewall just had something else that it wouldn't let through, but I know I can get into it with my direct user interface. I can't get to it through the SNMP access. So it's, you know, again, this is the kind of thing that you end up troubleshooting. And we'll spend some time on that today, just playing with it. So if you have a piece of equipment that is network accessible and SNMP, and you hook up SNMP and you can't get into it, very first troubleshooting step is to see if you can get into it through the usual network access. If you can, then it's nothing to do with your link from one to the other. It's configuration. Either you've got the port numbers you need blocked, or you don't have the passwords. In this case, what it probably is I didn't set the read-write passwords in the Passler in my SNMP manager. So that's the kind of thing that you will have to troubleshoot. We do have the I've got a gotcha slide at the very end, which is probably where I'll spend most of the time. But definitely, as I said, it does take some configuration. Once you've got it, it really, really works well. I'm going to take a break to grab a sip of coffee because somebody said we don't have coffee, but speak for yourselves because I certainly do. If anybody's got any questions, throw them at me now, and if not, we'll carry on. Now, I can't believe everybody is totally getting this 100%. Either I've made it way too simple or it's not as complex as I like to think it is, and I'm just not that bright. also possible.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah, Timothy.
Hey, we just got into SNMP this year, kind of thanks to the pandemic. I got stuck at home and got bored. One thing I noticed on a lot of MIBs we've been using is they give more than one result sometimes. It's not
Yes,
always a 1 or 0.
right.
So they have separate objects to determine the state, I guess.
Yes,
Level.
and so let's see if I can flip back to the OID. Or not that one, that one. As a rule, the OID on the syntax and the, let's see, there's usually, I shouldn't have used an input for this because the reset your choices are 0 and 1. But on anything like that, there should be, when you look at it with something like the iReasoning browser, it should give you the range of parameters for that particular OID. So yeah, it could be 0, 1. We monitor meter readings to the milliwatt or millivolt. So, you know, that very much would be an analog reading as far as the scale that it reads. So yes, there will be multiple states in some cases. That makes sense? Or did I just make it more confusing? All right, so where did I leave off? Here we go. So once you've got, and like I said, this is the biggest part of the process where it takes the most time is configuring the sensors. If you don't want to be blasted with everything, then definitely configuring the sensors one at a time. And that's what I'm doing here in PRTG. The cool thing is once you've got them configured, how you report them, whether you just do like what I've got here with a text-based table, or whether you go graphic with it, how you report them is 100% totally up to you. And I mean, this is just something I ripped off over my first coffee of the morning around 2-3 hours ago. So, you know, it's pretty basic to set up. I've got a lot of customers that do a lot of graphing and metering, like you can trend plot your power and your voltage and your current. So looking at it from the broadcast perspective, if you ever got an FCC inspection, do they even still do those? Or if you ever got a complaint or get an NAL that your power is off, then having a trend plot from an SNMP device that's time-stamped over a long period of time, assuming that it was intolerance, 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 out of tolerance, can save you the willful and repeated in a heartbeat. And as we all know, willful and repeated adds a 0 to the fine. So, you know, it is really, really valuable in that regard, especially because, I mean, a lot of us have meter readings, a lot of us log stuff, but most of us don't have trend plots of what we're doing. So this is something where the SNMP adds a lot of power. Okay, and the gotchas. And I'm going to finish this a little early, but you know, you can shoot me for it later. It's just one of those, there's a limited number of things we can play with some browsers, and where I've got screen sharing and I have the power, I've got about 4 of them open on my laptop at any given time, so we can have some fun with that too. So the gotchas definitely are the ports. Now 161 and 162 are the defaults for SNMP. These are the ones that we use. It may vary depending on your specific equipment, so definitely pay attention to the ports. As I said, for the read-write communities, you're going to need to assign passwords. Okay, and you need those passwords to be at both ends, both in the manager and in the client end. And they've got to match, all these little details. That was one issue we had when I was setting up Matt's transmitter, was I put the passwords in on his end and forgot to put them in on my browser. So, you know, again, depending on what you're doing, you can mess this up pretty quick if you haven't had enough coffee. All right, the simple browser, like the iReasoning browser, very little configuration. You load a MIB file in it, you hit it with an IP address, and it just basically walks its way through the entire MIB file and says, here's all your values. And you just scroll down and pick it. Let's see if I can get this to play nicely. iReasoning MIB browser. So what I'm going to do is open it up, I hope. And I didn't do a specific file share. So did that browser, somebody, Mark, I can see your camera. Did the browser just pop its way onto your screen? Awesome, thank you. So with this, so right now I've got an address set, and that is a Nautel transmitter. And as I said, you can break it down. And in this case, I've got the VS300 MIBs loaded. And you can pick and choose any single one. You can tell it to get the file. You can tell it to get next. If I wanted to set, let's see, VS controller, up, RF on, I can probably search it. There it is, RF off trap. Okay, so trap means it's an alarm. I am looking for control, VS. Minimize traps, activate controller, RF on, off, read, write. And so we have that selected, and we can tell it to set. And we could tell it to set 1 for on. And here's, oops, back. 1. Here's an example too about the multiple statuses, Timothy, because we were talking about that there a second or two ago. So this one, 0 is off, 1 is on, 2 is inhibited. Now that's the status it would return. That's not my actual control, but there. So if I tell that to set that and hit go, it should. 35, 0 is off. Yeah. I've got to get that password in there. 1. So you can basically, like I say, you've got full control. This is a very simple one because you pick it one at a time. Now, like I said, you can, yeah, I know. You can also tell it to walk, and it should scroll its way. Now it's not going to make a connection, so it's not going to. Let's see, we'll do a little troubleshooting. Tool. There. So we got the file, open session. I'm going to break this real fast. See, like I say, this is a learning thing for me as well. So this is where you would put, if you wanted to configure an XML file to operate it, it can go in there. And I say, this is iReasoning. This is one of the quote unquote simpler ones. What I don't have is the ability to set the password for this, and I should have that somewhere. And it may be that it's just a browser. But that gives you the structure on that. Let's close that one and play with Passler a bit. As I said, I've got way too many of these open at the moment at any given time. PRT.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Have there been issues in regards to SNMP with hacks or malwares or anything like that that you've heard of maybe?
So that's something that I should actually have a slide in here for. There are 3 versions of SNMP. Okay, version 1 was very susceptible to being hacked and accessed. Very little security was built into it and a lot of holes. SNMP v2, which is what most people are using now, is quite a bit more secure. I'd still recommend you put a firewall or some protection in front of it. And then SNMP v3, which is where we're probably all going to end up shortly. And by shortly, that could be next week, next year. But that is much more secure again. So as they play with this stuff in there, see, you get the notifications about security too, like with Passler, to tell me that, well, I can't send email because I've got that blocked. But it should have secure socket layer encryption and a secure password. Somebody who may or may not look like your friendly neighborhood Nautel rep just left the default password plugged in. So PRTG is cool because this is the one I was talking about where you can configure your own sensors. And let's see if we have, I don't remember, I didn't make any favorites, but you can add sensors by customizing them. So you can add them to a device, and we are going to create a new device. Oh, no, we're not. Scroll down. I should find, oops, there. MATS VS300. There. And so for MATS VS300, I can go in and tell it I want to build a custom sensor because all the rest of this stuff is related to network monitoring. I can tell it the system type, which for all of our boxes, we use a Linux kernel for every transmitter we build, and what technology we're using. And I can search in that, but for this, that doesn't do us a lot of good. So we are going to look at a specific OID. And we're going to say we want to look at, say, reflected power. All right. And we can set the priority. And this, like I say, knowing the OID number. Now this is easier to do as a show and tell than it is with a presentation. But let's see if I open downloads, and I should have there. All right, so here, oops, missed there. Here is what a MIB file looks like. And there is a massive, massive, massive amount of information. It starts off, whoops, sorry, it starts off with the upper level descriptions. These are the revisions we've done and how we change them. And then it breaks down into a full long list of every control and parameter, which we're going to scroll right past because we don't care about that for this. And then you will get down to the controls and monitoring. And these are the actual channels that we'd be looking at when we look for our OIDs. Now there's still a lot of things in here. I just happened to pick reflected power, which is right here fairly close to the top. And we can see that it's channel 257. So that part is good, but if we go back to our add sensor, of course, we need the full OID. And without knowing that, we have a bigger challenge. Now, in this case, because I've got, do I still have iReasoning? I think I closed that. All right, we'll go back to this presentation real quick because in the slideshow, I do have the VS300 OID in there. Oops. There. So this is the OID for a VS300 and 256 is the controller. So we would replace the 329 with the status from our MIB file. Let's see, that's that file. So if we wanted to look at reflected power, we'd replace that with 257. So then we go back to the, so we've got 1.4, 121.84. I should take a picture of this because I'm not going to remember it, but it doesn't matter for what we're doing. So we'd put it in here, and then 1.300.256. Whatever I said that was from the MIB file 257. So that's basically all you need to do, and you can give it a name. And here's the other thing. If you look back at the text file, it tells you that the syntax, so this is measured in thousandths or milliwatts. So if I wanted to display in milliwatts, I'd leave the multiplier by 1. If I want to display it in watts, I'll convert it. Okay, so that's the sort of thing that you need to know. Now this, because I just free typed that MIB file, I'm almost 100% sure I got it wrong. So it's going to return an error anyway. But that's how you add a sensor. And then from there, if you wanted to build the graphing, you can set higher priorities. So again, the power is pretty much unlimited on what you can do with this stuff. And definitely, there's a little learning curve because, as I said before, Laureate, for example, getting to this is a whole lot harder than it is with Passler. If you're if you're a Linux fan, the Zabbix is much more flexible, but you've got to speak sudo. If you don't speak sudo, you're not going to be playing with that one much. So that's it in a very, very large nutshell. Any questions so far? So we pretty much, oh, look at that. We hit the end in 15 minutes ahead of time. Mark, all made sense?
Yes, it did. And when you create these sensors, of course, I mean, obviously your devices that you're working with out in the field have to have the ability for SNMP with sets and traps.
Correct.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, if you don't have, well, number one, you need the object identifier. So if you're creating a sensor and you don't have an OID to work from, so, and there won't be an OID if they don't have SNMP capability. But the big thing is getting the MIB files. And I say, we put ours on the website. Not everybody does. So you do have to chase them sometimes. So that's the only big challenge, is just getting the MIB files. Once you've got those, I like the iReasoning browser because I can load the MIB file into the iReasoning browser and scroll through it and get all my OIDs, and then manually load them into whatever manager I happen to actually choose to use. So, you know, multiple tools for the job. It just really depends on what you want to accomplish. Right. Anybody else?
Thanks for the presentation, Jeff. That was excellent. And I imagine that the topic of, well, what if my favorite device X doesn't have SNMP would probably be the topic of yet another presentation of how to use serial and other devices to use an iReason or something like that to interface your favorite devices that don't have SNMP.
So one of the things we have done in our older transmitters, the J1000 comes to mind. We've got a serial to HTML interface on it. It wouldn't be hard in that brick to load SNMP firmware and do something very similar. So you're right. And that would be a cool topic.
Yeah, and of course, the more, you know, more and more manufacturers are embracing SNMP for all of their products. It's interesting how this all actually, SNMP actually did start in the IP world. And others have embraced it for their own
nefarious means.
Yeah, you know, for example, the energy industry uses SNMP for a lot of things to monitor.
Yeah, like I said, the cool thing about it is that the bit rate requirement is really, really low. So, you know, and that's what started SNMP back in the late 80s, was the fact that you could monitor a network over pretty much over a dial-up connection and have a pretty good idea what was going on. And this, it's funny because during our webinar yesterday, that was one of the things Kirk mentioned, was that you know, the IT industry is a heck of a lot bigger than the broadcast industry. So it makes a lot of sense that they get something cool and shiny that we're eventually going to benefit from that. And no question, they've got the resources to put into the shiny stuff. So it's always kind of fun. No, mandatory product slide just because, you know, we build transmitters. And on that note, thank you very, very much, folks.